What happens when one of America's most trusted newsmen finally drops the script? What happens when years of polished royal PR meet a journalist who's done playing nice? You're about to find out, because what unfolded on Good Morning America wasn't your typical celebrity sit-down. It was a televised reckoning, one that left Meghan Markle visibly shaken and viewers across the country stunned. This wasn't just an interview. This was George Stephanopoulos, unfiltered. This was a moment where truth collided with narrative, and something had to give. The calm before the storm, the studio was immaculate. Soft morning light poured through the windows. Meghan Markle sat poised, every strand of hair perfectly in place, the picture of calm elegance. Across from her, George Stephanopoulos reviewed his notes, but there was something different in his posture. Something sharper, tighter. Millions of viewers tuned in expecting royal charm and polished talking points. What they got was fire. "Meghan, thank you for being here this morning," George began, his voice calm but clipped. "I want to start with something on many minds. You've spoken extensively about your journey, your truth. But when you reflect on some of the claims you've made, particularly about the royal family, do you ever wonder if those statements might have been shaped by your emotional state at the time?" It landed like a slap. Meghan blinked, her smile faltering for just a beat. "I'm sorry, George. I'm not sure what you're implying. My truth is my truth. I've spoken carefully and honestly about my lived experiences." George leaned forward slightly, his pen tapping rhythmically on his notepad. Lived experiences. "But even lived experiences can be subjective, can't they?" he said. "Haven't we all? In moments of distress or pressure, remembered events not exactly as they happened, but as they felt. Have you considered that possibility in light of the serious allegations you've made?" The studio held its breath. Meghan's posture stiffened, hands tightening in her lap. "George, this is the exact kind of gaslighting I endured inside that institution. You're suggesting my accounts of racism, of being silenced, of mental health neglect, were distortions, emotional exaggerations. That's not only insulting, it's dangerous." "I'm not gaslighting anyone," George replied, his tone cool, unwavering. "I'm doing what responsible journalism demands. You made serious allegations, ones with massive consequences. The public has a right to understand the foundation of those claims." He leaned in, sharper now, more direct. "When you said there were conversations about your son's skin color, you didn't name who said it. You let speculation tear through an entire family. You painted them with the broadest, ugliest brush, racism, while offering no specifics. How is that fair?" The gloves come off, Meghan's eyes narrowed, a flicker of anger rising. "Are you seriously suggesting I should have named someone publicly and destroyed their life over a private conversation? I was being protective. I was trying to handle it with dignity." "Protective of who exactly?" George fired back. "Because from where I sit, it looks like you were protective of your narrative. Not the institution you married into. Not the family you joined. Not the nation that welcomed you. You made explosive claims and then took shelter behind ambiguity when accountability was demanded." The control room was silent. Camera operators were still. Even behind the scenes, producers barely breathed. This wasn't a segment anymore. It was a seismic moment. Meghan took a breath, steadying herself. "You're twisting this." I was asked a direct question and I answered it honestly. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone, but I also wasn't going to lie to protect an institution that failed to protect me. The George's laugh was cold. Brief, not amused. "Failed to protect you," he echoed. "Meghan, you were given a global platform, a title, security staff. You married into one of the most privileged families on earth. And when it turned out that royal life came with expectations and limitations, just like it does for everyone, your response was to blow it all up on international television. Is that what failure looks like to you?" Your Meghan's voice rose. "You're oversimplifying something incredibly complex. You have no idea what it's like to be silenced, To have your life dictated by protocol. To watch lies printed about you daily while the family refuses to correct them. George paused, then slowly set down his pen. He turned to the camera. And then, back to Meghan. "Let's talk about those lies then," he said, his voice low and firm. "Because I've done my homework, and I think it's time the audience heard the facts." George leaned in, his voice even, but his words were scalpel, sharp. "You've said you were unprepared for royal life. That no one explained the rules, that you were left in the dark. But, Meghan, you dated Harry for 2 years before your engagement. You had access to the internet, to books, to decades of public record about what this life entailed. Are you asking the public to believe you walked into that world completely blind?" Meghan's cheeks flushed. Her hand moved to her bracelet, fingers twisting the links as she paused. "Searching. Research and reality are 2 very different things," she said finally, voice tight. "You can read about a hurricane, George, but that doesn't prepare you for standing in one. Until you're the one being criticized for how you close a car door or how you hold a coffee cup, you have no idea what it's like." "Fair enough." George nodded, though his eyes didn't soften. "But let's talk specifics." His tone dropped, measured but merciless. "You said Kate made you cry before your wedding. That story painted her as cold and callous. But later, you admitted it was actually the other way around. That you made Kate cry, and that she apologized, brought you flowers even. So which version should the public believe? And more importantly, why did you let the first version fester in the headlines for so long before correcting it?" The studio falls silent. Time froze. The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably, long enough for viewers at home to feel it in their chest. Meghan opened her mouth, then stopped. Her words caught somewhere between instinct and strategy. George didn't blink. "I'm waiting for an answer, Meghan," he said quietly, with the weight of decades of journalism behind him. "You allowed your sister-in-law to be vilified in the press over something you knew wasn't true. That's not a mistake. That's cruelty." The crack in her composure was visible now. "You don't understand the pressure I was under," Meghan said, her voice rising. "Everything was closing in on me. The wedding, the headlines, the demand to be perfect. When that story came out, I chose not to speak up, not to protect myself, but to protect the privacy of what was a private moment between 2 women. I never meant to hurt anyone." "But you did," George said, relentless. "You hurt Kate. You hurt the monarchy's reputation. And you damaged your own credibility by only correcting the narrative when it suited you." It felt less like truth, and more like damage control. The camera caught her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her water glass. She took a sip, swallowed hard. "That's not fair," she said finally, voice shaking. "You're painting me like I'm manipulative. Like I was playing a game. I was trying to survive in a situation where every word I said was twisted, every expression turned into a headline. I was damned if I spoke, and damned if I stayed silent." The question that changed the room. George leaned back slightly, but his eyes never left hers. "Let's talk about survival. Then," he said, "you've spoken about suicidal thoughts, about asking for help, and about being told that seeking therapy would be bad for the institution. That's a serious claim. But here's what I don't understand." He paused, just long enough to let the question take shape. "You had resources. You had financial freedom. You had a husband who loved you. Why not just get help anyway? Why did you need permission to care for your mental health?" The Meghan's eyes narrowed. The diplomatic facade was gone. Her voice, when it came, was sharp and unguarded. "Because you don't understand how that family works," she snapped. "You don't just decide things. Every action has to be approved. Every request is filtered. Every step is monitored by people whose job is to protect the crown, not the people inside it. I was told no, because it would look bad." George tilted his head slightly, his tone turning clinical. "So you're saying you chose to suffer? You stayed silent, risked your mental health, rather than upset the palace. His voice held a note of disbelief. And Meghan, breath quickening, met his gaze with fury. I didn't choose to suffer, she said, her voice cracking. I was told my pain didn't matter, that my life didn't matter, so long as the headlines looked good the next day. The George leaned forward slightly, his voice deceptively calm, almost gentle, until the blade beneath the words landed. You chose to risk your mental health, potentially your life, rather than walk into a therapist's office. That doesn't sound like the strong, independent woman you've so often portrayed yourself to be. The words hit like a slap. The studio lights seemed to burn hotter. Meghan shifted in her chair, suddenly aware of every camera in the room. Every lens trained on her. You're oversimplifying something incredibly complex, she said, jaw tightening. When you're inside that machine, you don't think clearly. You forget you can choose. You're trained to seek permission, to wait for approval. You become so dependent on their guidance and protection, you forget you have agency at all. George gave a slow nod, but his expression didn't budge. And yet, he said, you made independent decisions in other areas. You kept working with your patronages against advice, maintained friendships the firm allegedly disapproved of, wore outfits that broke protocol, so you could act on your own when it suited you. Meghan's spine straightened, her tone sharpened. Those are completely different situations. Choosing a dress or supporting a charity is not the same as navigating the psychological minefield of royal life while suffering in silence. One affects public image. The other nearly destroyed me. George's eyes narrowed, voice hardening. But that's the point, isn't it? You took action when it served your image, but claimed helplessness when it came to your own well-being. That's not strength. That's selective victimhood. A stillness before the storm. The accusation dropped like a stone in water. The silence that followed was heavy and charged. Meghan's face twitched through a storm of emotions. Shock, indignation, fury, before hardening into cold steel. How dare you, she said, her voice low but seething. How dare you sit there and question my mental health? You don't know what it's like to feel broken, to feel like there's no way out, to be treated not as a human being, but a liability, a threat, a PR problem to be controlled. George didn't flinch. You're right. I don't know that, but I do know what accountability looks like. And right now, what I see is someone who's made a career out of playing the victim, while wielding tremendous influence. You can't have it both ways, Meghan. The gloves come off. Meghan's voice rose, disbelief curling her words. I left everything behind. My career, my country, my family, my independence. I sacrificed everything to try to make that marriage, that role, work. And when I realized it was destroying me, I made the painful, brave decision to walk away. How is that playing the victim? George picked up his pen again, tapping it with unsettling precision. You left, yes. But you didn't leave quietly. You left with a Netflix deal, a best-selling memoir, and a press tour that painted the monarchy as villains and yourself as a martyr. That wasn't a quiet departure. That was a campaign. A rebranding. Meghan's posture stiffened, her hands curled into fists. We had to speak. Lies were being told. We had to defend ourselves because the palace wouldn't. George raised an eyebrow. Defend yourselves, or rewrite the narrative, because your story, it evolves. Details shift, facts bend. Elements are added, others disappear. That's not setting the record straight. That's narrative management. A crack in the foundation, the tension was unbearable. Meghan's voice trembled, not from weakness, but rage. My story hasn't changed, she hissed. What's changed is my willingness to protect people who never protected me. What's changed is realizing that staying silent while my reputation burned was their strategy, not mine. George leaned in, voice suddenly deadly calm. So this isn't about truth, or healing, or even justice. This is about revenge, making sure if you suffered, they did too. The accusation landed like a punch. Meghan recoiled as if slapped, eyes wide with fury and disbelief. Revenge, she echoed. You think I endured all of this for revenge? The media abuse, the death threats, the racial smears, the miscarriage. You think I chose that for vengeance? No, George said, without blinking. I think you realize that victimhood sells. It sells books, streaming deals, interviews, sympathy. The more dramatic the story, the better the brand. And you've become very good at telling a very profitable story. A breaking point. The chair scraped back sharply as Meghan stood. The sound sliced through the studio like a siren. I don't have to sit here and be ambushed like this, she snapped. You lured me here under false pretenses. This was never a real interview. You had your narrative locked in the moment I walked in. George didn't move. Didn't blink. I invited you, he said coolly, to have a real conversation. Something in short supply when you're involved. We're done, Meghan said. But George's voice cut through her exit like a scalpel. Sit down. But absolute. Sit down, Meghan. We're not finished. She froze, hovered on the edge. The balance of power had shifted, and she knew it. The lights, the cameras, the crew. No one moved. Because I have one more question, and I think the public deserves an answer. Meghan's eyes locked on his. A standoff. Her face was a battlefield. Pride, defiance, calculation. Her chest rose and fell. Slowly, uncertainly, she sat back down, and the room held its breath. Finally, and only with visible reluctance, Meghan eased back into her seat. But the tension didn't leave her body. Her posture stayed stiff, guarded, as if bracing for impact. George's voice cut through the silence with a tone of quiet finality. Here's what I want to understand. If everything you've said is true, if you were truly mistreated, silenced, discriminated against, why is there no record of it? No emails, no texts, no recordings, no contemporaneous notes. Not a single witness willing to go on the record. This is an institution with hundreds of staff, countless meetings, layers of protocol. And yet somehow there's no paper trail. Not one trace of systemic abuse. How is that possible? The question lingered in the air like a slow, falling blade. Meghan's face shifted rapidly. Confusion, then realization, then something close to panic. She saw the trap now. This wasn't just about discrepancies. This was about the credibility of her entire story. That's not how these things happen, she stammered. Her media polish had vanished. These were private conversations. People don't walk around recording microaggressions or keeping notes on every time they feel excluded. George didn't flinch. But they do keep records of policy decisions. They document formal requests. You've said you asked for mental health support and were denied. Are you saying there's no documentation of that request? Nothing in palace files. No official denial. You said there were discussions about your son's skin color. Are we to believe no one noted what was said? Who said it? Or how it was handled? Meghan's hands trembled slightly in her lap. Her voice was quieter now, less certain. You're trying to turn this into a courtroom cross-examination. These were personal, family matters. George's voice rose for the first time. Meghan, you took these family matters and made them public. You went on national television and accused the royal family of racism, neglect, and institutional cruelty. You made them public, dramatically, globally, and now you want to shield them from scrutiny. The studio fell dead silent. Just the mechanical hum of cameras and lighting equipment remained. Everyone in the room knew they were watching something rare, not just an interview, but the slow unraveling of a meticulously curated public image. I have proof, Meghan whispered, though her voice wavered. I have my lived experience. My truth. George's head tilted slightly, his voice low, almost pitying. Your lived experience isn't proof. And your truth isn't the truth. What our audience has seen here today is a person who's built a platform on pain, real or perceived, and turned it into a brand. A narrative so polished it no longer allows room for facts. And along the way, You've been willing to damage relationships, reputations, even institutions to keep that narrative intact. Meghan looked into the camera. Really looked. For the first time since the questioning had begun, her eyes were wide, pleading. "That's not who I am. I never wanted any of this." "I didn't ask for it." "But you made sure it happened," George replied calmly. "And you made sure it happened publicly, loudly, profitably." He leaned back in his chair. The real question now is whether the public, whether the world, is still buying what you're selling. Or whether they're going to start asking the same questions I've asked here today. The interview ended with a single, unforgettable image: Meghan Markle, silent, shaken, staring blankly ahead, her composure fractured beyond repair, and George Stephanopoulos, steady, focused, staring directly into the camera with the quiet satisfaction of a journalist who had done what journalism is meant to do: question power, challenge narrative, and hold the influential to account. No matter how sympathetic the story may seem, what was meant to be a routine appearance had become something else entirely. A broadcast bombshell, a masterclass in accountability, and the spark of a nationwide conversation. What did you think of this stunning exchange? Did George go too far, or did he do what every journalist should be doing? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. We'll be breaking down every second of this explosive interview in our next deep dive. Which public figure do you think needs to be held accountable next?